The clock above the register read 2:13 a.m. when three black SUVs rolled to a stop outside Voss family kitchen, and Alara already knew, the way you know a storm is coming before the first drop falls, that her father had run out of time. She was still in her apron, still smelled like fryer oil and dish soap. And through the front window she watched a man in a charcoal suit step out of the lead vehicle and stand on the sidewalk without hurrying, without looking around, like he owned the entire block and was simply deciding whether to keep it. He did not knock. He walked in like the door had been left open for him. If you've ever stood between someone you love and the worst mistake of their life, you already know what Alara felt in that moment. Not fear. Not exactly. Something colder and more permanent, like watching a wall crack and knowing it cannot hold. This is her story. If it moves you, if it makes you angry, if it makes you wonder what you would have done, hit that subscribe button and stay with us. Drop a like and leave a comment telling us the city and country where you're watching from. We want to know how far this story travels, because what happens to Alara next will test everything you believe about loyalty, survival, and the kind of love that nobody plans for. Now, let's begin. The man's name was Dante Calder, though Alara did not know that yet. What she knew was this: he was tall, somewhere in his mid-30s, with dark hair cut short and eyes the color of deep water on an overcast morning. He wore no jewelry, no visible weapon. His suit fit the way expensive things fit, quietly, without announcing itself. He moved through the front door of Voss family kitchen like the space had been built to accommodate him, and he stopped just past the threshold, hands loose at his sides, and looked at her father. Marcus Voss was behind the counter. He had heard the cars. His face had gone the color of old dishwater, and his hands, his big, calloused restaurant owner hands that had shaped 10,000 bread loaves and pulled 10,000 plates from the line, those hands were pressed flat on the countertop like he was trying to keep himself upright. "Marcus," the man said. Just that. One word. Quiet as a confession. Marcus did not answer. Two men had come in behind the suited one. They stood near the door without speaking, arms at their sides, faces neutral. They weren't looking at anything in particular, which somehow made them more frightening. Alara stepped out from the kitchen, passed through. She still had the dish towel over her shoulder. She didn't think about it. She simply moved, the way you move when something inside you recognizes that the next 30 seconds are going to matter for a very long time. "We're closed," she said. The man in the suit looked at her. He didn't seem surprised to see her, which itself was a small alarm going off somewhere in the back of her mind. "I know," he said. "This won't take long. Whatever you need to say to my father, you can say in front of me." He considered her, not in the way men sometimes looked at her, calculating, sizing up. More like he was reading something, some piece of information she hadn't known she was broadcasting. "All right," he said. He reached into the interior pocket of his jacket. Marcus made a sound, not quite a word, something broken and involuntary. And the man paused, looked at him, and then slowly, deliberately, produced an envelope. He laid it on the nearest table. $42,600, he said, with interest accrued over 7 months. That's the number as of midnight tonight. Alara looked at her father. Marcus was staring at the envelope like it had teeth. "Dad." Her voice was careful, even. "What is this?" "Alara, what did you do?" Marcus's jaw worked. He pushed himself upright from the counter and opened his mouth and then closed it again. And in that silence, Alara felt something collapse inside her chest. Not dramatically, not with any noise. Just the quiet rearrangement of everything she thought she'd understood about her life. Her father had a gambling problem. She'd known that for years, had lived with the edges of it. The cash shortfalls, the evenings he couldn't be reached, the way he sometimes came home looking both relieved and ashamed. But $42,000. 7 months. An envelope delivered at 2 in the morning by a man who walked through locked doors like he owned the air inside them. This was different. He borrowed from an informal lending institution, the man said. He said it without accusation, just factual, like reading weather data. The terms were clear when he agreed to them. He missed 3 repayment windows. "I was going to pay it," Marcus said. His voice had gotten small. "I had a plan. The weekend receipts from the Riverside event." "The Riverside event was 6 weeks ago," the man said. Marcus stopped. "You spent the receipts." It wasn't a question. Marcus looked at his hands. Ilara breathed. She kept her face very still and breathed in thought, because this was the moment. She understood it clearly, the way you understand things you'd rather not. Where the people in those SUVs outside were expecting her father to panic, to beg, to fracture completely under the weight of what he owed. And they were probably right to expect it, because Marcus Voss had been fracturing slowly for 3 years, and the restaurant had been covering for him the whole time, and now there was nothing left to cover with. "What happens if he can't pay?" she asked. The man looked at her again. "Then we begin collecting from his collateral." "What collateral?" "This building, its contents, the liquor license, the commercial lease." A pause. "And anyone who co-signed the original agreement." Ilara turned to her father. "Did you co-sign someone else into this?" Marcus could not look at her. "Dad." "Your Uncle Bren," he said, barely audible. "And your cousin Joel. They didn't know what they were signing. I told them it was for a business loan, a real one." The room went very quiet. Ilara set the dish towel down on the nearest table. She set it down very carefully, folding it in half without thinking, some old reflex of tidiness operating below the surface of what she was actually feeling. "Get out," she said to her father. "Go in the back." Ilara, "Oh, go." He went. She turned to the man in the suit. She was 28 years old, 5'5" in her kitchen clogs, still smelling of the fryer, and she looked directly into those flat gray eyes and said, "What do you actually want?" Something shifted in his expression. It wasn't warmth. It wasn't anything she could name easily, more like acknowledgement. Like he'd been waiting to see what she was made of and had just gotten his answer. 24 hours, he said, full repayment, or we begin the collection process. "You know he can't get $40,000 in 24 hours. "Yes." "So this isn't actually about the money." He said nothing. "You came here at 2 in the morning with 2 men and an envelope you already knew he couldn't answer. That's not a collection visit." She held his gaze. "What is this really about?" The man looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached into his jacket again, slowly, the same careful deliberateness, and placed a second item on the table beside the envelope. A photograph. Ilara picked it up. It showed her. Outside this building, 3 weeks ago, from across the street. She remembered that morning. She'd been taking out the recycling at 7 a.m. before the lunch prep. In the photograph, she was holding a trash bag, hair still in its night braid, face turned halfway toward the camera. But that wasn't the part that stopped her breath. In the background, half hidden behind a parked delivery truck, there was a man. Looking at her, his face was partly visible. He was wearing a dark jacket and had his phone angled, not at the building, but at her specifically. There were 4 more photographs beneath the first. Different days, different times. The same man, or sometimes a second one, always at a distance, always watching. Ilara put the photographs down. She made herself do it slowly. "How long?" she asked. 6 weeks, minimum. Possibly longer. "Who are they?" "People who work for a man named Victor Rael. He runs a competing organization on the south side of the city." He paused. "Your father's debt wasn't the only reason I came tonight." Ilara looked at the photographs again, then at the envelope. "You're saying someone is watching me." "I'm saying someone has been watching you, with intent." "Why?" "We're still working on that." He pulled out a chair and sat down, unhurried, like they had all the time in the world. "But I have a theory and a proposal." She didn't sit. "I'm listening." "My name is Dante Calder. I manage a significant number of interests in this city. Among those interests is a concern for stability, which Victor Rael has been systematically working to destroy for the last 18 months. He put both hands flat on the table, open, visible. "Rael's people have been watching you because they believe you have access to something. I don't know what yet, but they're not following you out of curiosity. And your proposal." He looked at her steadily. "Marry me." The room didn't change. The fluorescent light still buzzed above the pass-through. The walk-in compressor still clicked and hummed in the kitchen. Outside, a bus rolled past on the empty street. Ilara said, "Excuse me?" "A formal arrangement, documented and legally binding." His voice was completely even. "Your father's debt disappears. Your uncle and your cousin are released from the agreement. You and your family are placed under the protection of the Calder organization, which means Victor Rael's people cannot touch you without starting a war they cannot afford to start. You're asking me to marry you. I'm offering you a contract. There's a difference. What do you get out of it? He was quiet for a moment. It was the first time he hadn't answered immediately, and that small hesitation told her more than the words that followed. Rael is looking for leverage against me. You appear to be connected to something he wants. If you're formally connected to me, the dynamic changes. You're using me as a shield. I'm offering you safety in exchange for a formal alliance. You would maintain complete independence, separate residence within the estate. No obligations beyond what's written in the contract. He paused. I'm not asking for anything you're not willing to give. Alara picked up the photograph again. The man behind the delivery truck. His phone angled at her. 6 weeks of this, and she hadn't known. 6 weeks of going to work and coming home and taking out the recycling while someone watched and waited. No, she said. Dante Calder looked at her. No, she said again. I'm not going to marry a stranger because my father made a mess. I'm not going to hand my life over to someone I met 12 minutes ago because you walked through my door with a scary story and a photograph. She put the photo down. I'll find the money. Give me a week instead of 24 hours. A week? Yes. He said nothing for a moment. Then, $42,000 in 7 days. Yes. Where will it come from? She didn't answer that, because she didn't know yet. But she was not going to say that to this man. Dante Calder looked at her for a long time. Then he stood. He picked up the envelope and returned it to his jacket pocket. He left the photographs on the table. 7 days, he said. The debt stands until then. He buttoned his jacket. But the photographs stay with you, because the men in those pictures aren't waiting on anyone's schedule. He walked to the door. One of the men held it open. At the threshold, Dante turned back. Lock your back door tonight, he said. The alley camera on the building across from yours went dark 2 hours ago. I noticed it on the way in. Then he was gone. The SUVs pulled away from the curb in sequence. The restaurant was quiet. Alara stood in the empty dining room for a moment. Then she walked to the back. Marcus was sitting on an overturned milk crate in the kitchen corridor, head in his hands, looking like a man waiting for a verdict he already knew. How long? She asked. He didn't pretend not to understand. 7 months. From Calder's organization specifically? A pause. From someone who works with his organization. An advisor. A man named Silas. He looked up. I didn't know who he was when I took the money. He came in like any other private lender. Professional. Clean. The terms seemed reasonable. They never seem unreasonable at first. Alara, Uncle Bren and Joel, you put their names on a document without telling them what it was. Marcus looked away. Dad. Her voice cracked, just slightly, against her will. Bren is 63 years old. Joel has 2 kids. I know. You knew when you did it. He didn't answer. Alara pressed the heel of her hand against her sternum, right where the pressure was building, and breathed through it. She was not going to fall apart in this kitchen. Not tonight. There would be time for that later, for the grief and the anger and all the rest of it. Right now she needed to think. The restaurant's cash reserve, she said. What's actually in it? 11,000. Equipment. We still owe on the walk-in and the range. The lease? 18 months remaining. Can't break it without penalty. She did the math. She kept doing it and kept coming up short, rearranging the numbers the way you rearrange furniture in a room that's too small, hoping a different configuration will make it fit. It didn't fit. She picked up the photographs from the dining room on her way through, stood at the kitchen pass-through, and looked at them again under better light. The man behind the truck had a scar along his left jaw. She could see it in the third photograph, where the angle was slightly better. He was young, mid-20s maybe. He had the specific kind of stillness that came from training, not from patience. Professional. Whatever that meant in the context of a man watching her take out her garbage. She went upstairs to the apartment above the restaurant, the 3 rooms she'd lived in for 4 years since moving back to help her father when her mother got sick, the 3 rooms she'd stayed in after the funeral because she'd never quite found the momentum to leave, and she sat on the edge of her bed and looked at the wall. $42,000. 7 days. Men in photographs she hadn't known existed. A man in a charcoal suit who had walked through her door at 2 in the morning and offered her a contract marriage like it was a business proposition, because maybe to him it was. She thought about what Dante had said. Not the marriage proposal. She pushed that aside for now, filed it in the category of things she'd deal with when she had to. She thought about the other part. Victor Rael. Your father's debt wasn't the only reason I came tonight. Why would someone named Victor Rael care about her? She was a restaurant manager. She ran inventory, managed 3 part-time cooks, handled the bookkeeping and the supplier negotiations and the health inspections. Her life was flour and grease and the particular exhaustion of keeping a small business alive. She had nothing. She knew nothing. She was nobody's leverage, except she thought about her father's words. I didn't know who he was. Someone who works with his organization, a man named Silas. Why had Silas come to Marcus specifically? Not to a larger borrower, not to someone with actual assets. To her father, who ran a struggling restaurant and had a gambling habit, and was exactly the kind of man you'd approach if you wanted someone vulnerable and manageable, unless you didn't want a reliable borrower, unless you wanted a reason to be connected to this family. Alara lay back on the bed, still in her work clothes, and stared at the ceiling. Outside, the city hummed and moved in its nighttime rhythms. She listened to it, and she thought, and she did not sleep. By the time gray light started coming through the window, she had made a decision. She got up. She washed her face. She put on a clean shirt. She went downstairs and told her father to call Bren and Joelle and tell them to come to the restaurant tonight, and that everything was going to be explained and that he was going to be the one explaining it. She watched his face do the thing faces do when people realize they have run out of room to hide. Then she picked up the phone and she called the number that had been printed at the bottom of the envelope. It rang twice. You changed your mind, Dante Calder said. No greeting. No surprise. I have conditions, Alara said. More than one, and they're not negotiable. A pause. When he spoke again, his voice was exactly the same, level, measured, giving nothing. But she thought she heard something underneath it, something that might have been respect. Come to the Alderton building at 9 a.m., he said. Bring whatever you need to bring. We'll talk. She hung up. She stood in the kitchen of her father's restaurant with her hand still on the phone, and she looked at the space around her, the dented prep counters, the walk-in door with its broken handle, the reach-in cooler with the strip of tape across the temperature gauge where the dial had broken off. And she made herself a promise. Whatever she agreed to, whatever came next, she was not going to disappear inside it. She was not going to become something smaller than she already was. She'd been making herself smaller for 4 years. Staying, keeping the lights on. Covering for Marcus, absorbing his failures, telling herself it was temporary when she'd known for at least 2 years that it wasn't. Whatever Dante Calder was. Whatever she was walking into at 9 o'clock this morning. She was done being the one who absorbed things. At 8:45, she walked out of Voss family kitchen into the early morning, the photographs folded in her jacket pocket, and caught a cab going east toward the Alderton building. She did not look back at the restaurant. She would later wish she had. The Alderton building had no sign out front. That was the first thing Alara noticed when the cab stopped at the address. A 19-story glass and steel structure on the east side of the financial district. The kind of building that existed inside a city without ever quite belonging to it. To it, no marquee, no directory placard beside the entrance. Just a doorman in a dark coat who looked at her like he'd been told she was coming and still wasn't sure what to make of her. She went in. The lobby was all pale stone and ambient lighting, the kind of space that felt expensive by making you feel slightly underdressed inside it. A woman at the reception desk looked up, said her name back to her like a confirmation rather than a question, and directed her to the elevators at the far end. 17th floor, the woman said. Someone will meet you. Nobody met her. The elevator opened onto a corridor with a single door at the end of it, and she walked toward it because there was nowhere else to walk. And when she pushed it open, she found herself in a room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a long conference table with nothing on it, and Dante Calder standing with his back to her, looking out at the skyline. He was in a different suit, dark gray, nearly black. He hadn't slept. She could tell from the set of his shoulders, the particular stillness of someone who'd been awake for too long and had made peace with it. He turned when he heard her come in. You're early, he said. You said 9. It's 8:58. Sit down. I'll stand. He looked at her for a moment, then turned back to the window briefly before moving to the table and sitting across from where she wasn't sitting. He put both hands flat on the surface. Open. The same gesture as the night before. She filed that away. It was deliberate, she was nearly certain. A man who communicated through very small, precise signals. Your conditions, he said. She'd written them on a notepad before she left and then torn the paper up, because she didn't need paper. She'd been composing the list since 4 a.m. Separate living quarters. Real separate. Not adjacent rooms with a shared wall. A space with a door that locks from my side. Agreed. My father's debt is cleared the moment I sign anything, not after, before. He nodded once. My uncle Bren and my cousin Joel are fully released from the agreement, in writing, with their names on the release documentation. Also agreed. She watched him. He was agreeing too quickly, which either meant the terms were genuinely fine with him, or he was letting her run out the list before introducing the things she wasn't going to like. I keep my job at the restaurant, she said. I come and go as I need to. I don't ask permission. There will be security protocols. I'll follow reasonable ones. I won't follow ones that amount to house arrest. Define reasonable. I tell someone where I'm going before I leave. I don't go anywhere alone after dark until the situation with Rael is resolved. I accept a car and a driver during that period. She paused. In exchange, no one follows me inside the restaurant, no one monitors my personal communications, and I'm told the truth about what's actually happening in this situation. All of it, not the version you decide I can handle. He was quiet for a moment. That last condition is the one you're going to push back on, she said. It's the one that requires the most trust in both directions. Then we're starting from the same place. He looked at her. Something moved in his expression. Again, that thing she couldn't name, that quality of acknowledgement that wasn't warmth but wasn't coldness either. It was the look of a man recalibrating. All right, he said. All right meaning yes to full information. Yes. She sat down. They looked at each other across the table, and in that moment, Alara understood something clearly. This man was not a person who made promises carelessly. Whatever he'd just agreed to, he meant it. Whether that made him trustworthy or simply dangerous in a more complicated way remained to be determined. The marriage, she said, legally binding, but no public performance. I'm not going to events and playing a role. There may be occasions where a visible arrangement serves the purpose. Then I need advance notice, not an instruction, a conversation. He considered. Agreed. How long? The arrangement? Yes. How long before we dissolve it? He leaned back slightly. When Rael is no longer a threat, when the situation that brought you to his attention is resolved. Months, not years. And if it becomes years? Then we renegotiate. She stared at the table surface. The silence stretched. Tell me what you actually know about Rael, she said. Not what you told me last night to make me afraid. What you actually know. Dante reached to the side and picked up a manila folder that had been sitting on the chair next to him. He opened it and laid 3 photographs on the table. Not surveillance shots this time, printed documents, financial records, a map with points marked on it. Victor Rael has been moving against established operations on the south and west sides for 18 months. He's not building an empire, he's dismantling existing ones. He buys debt, acquires leverage, and then uses both to force concessions. He pointed to the map. 3 separate organizations have ceded territory to him in the last year. Not through violence, through financial strangulation. He sounds like a banker. He sounds like one. He isn't. Dante tapped one of the documents. 8 months ago, one of the men who refused to make concessions to Rael was found in the Chicago River. His name was Leon Marsh. He ran a legitimate security firm and 2 other operations on the north side. Rael made him an offer. Marsh said no. 3 weeks later, Marsh was dead and his firm's assets were absorbed into a holding company Rael controls through 4 layers of shell corporations. Alara looked at the photograph of Leon Marsh. It was a portrait, a professional headshot, the kind used on a business website. He was somewhere in his 50s, gray at the temples, with the kind of face that suggested a man who had once been harder and had softened without losing the memory of it. And Rael's connection to my father. Your father borrowed from Silas Vane. I've worked with Silas for 11 years. He handles the financial architecture of my organization, accounts, investments, the clean business side. He paused. I didn't know Silas had extended private credit to your father until 3 days ago, when I started investigating who had created the specific debt structure that brought your family to our attention. You're saying your own man set up the debt without telling you. I'm saying that's what the evidence currently suggests. Why? That's the question I don't have an answer to yet. Ilara pressed her fingers against the edge of the table. But you had a theory. You said that last night. Someone wanted me inside your household. Yes. Which means Silas, your man, manufactured the debt specifically to create a path to you. Through you, yes. And you still don't know why I'm the path. Dante looked at her steadily. No. Do you? She thought about it. She genuinely, carefully thought about it, turned over her own life the way you turn over a stone and look at what's been living underneath it. 28 years old. No criminal record. No unusual associations. A restaurant manager with a food handler's certification and a 4-year business degree from a state school she'd half paid for with her own shifts. Her mother had died of a long illness. Her father gambled and borrowed and kept secrets. She had 3 friends she still talked to regularly, none of them connected to anything remotely dangerous. No, she said, I have nothing. Dante nodded, like he'd expected that answer, and it confirmed something rather than resolved it. She signed the documents at 10:15. A lawyer she'd never met before appeared, reviewed them with her, and left. The process took 40 minutes, and at the end of it, Marcus Voss's debt was formally eliminated. Bren and Joel's names were removed from every document they'd never knowingly signed, and Ilara had made herself the wife, on paper, of a man she'd known for exactly 8 hours. She called her father from the lobby on her way out. It's handled, she said. Bren and Joel are clear. Your debt is gone. Silence. Dad? You didn't have to. I know I didn't have to. She kept her voice even. Tonight, everyone at the restaurant, you tell them, I'm not doing it for you. She hung up before he could respond. She moved into the Calder estate 2 days later. The estate was on the north edge of the city. Not suburban, not rural, just the specific kind of property that existed at the boundary of both, where the city noise fell away and the trees got real. The house was large without being ostentatious, all stone and dark wood, built in the early part of the century and renovated recently without destroying what the original structure had been. The grounds were enclosed, guards rotated at the exterior perimeter. Inside, the staff was small and professional and essentially invisible in the way that well-trained household staff managed to be. Her room was on the second floor, east wing. It locked from the inside, as agreed. It had its own bathroom, its own small sitting area with a desk, and a window that looked out over a garden that wouldn't be blooming for another 2 months. Ilara stood at that window on her first morning and looked at the bare branch trees and thought about impermanence. Not in a poetic way, just in the practical way of someone calculating how long she needed to remain functional inside a situation before it resolved itself. She did not see Dante until dinner. He appeared at the dining room at 7, jacket off, sleeves rolled to the elbows, looking like a man who had spent the day working and had not found it satisfying. He sat at the opposite end of a table that was too long for 2 people and served himself without ceremony. They ate in silence for several minutes. You had someone drive you to the restaurant this morning, he said, not looking up. I told the driver where I was going before I left. He said you stayed 4 hours. I work there. I know. He looked up. I'm not objecting. I'm noting. There's a difference? Yes. She ate. She thought about what she was doing, this particular domestic strange theater they'd constructed, this careful arrangement of 2 people sharing a space while being very precise about not sharing anything else. And she thought it was probably sustainable for a while. Dante Calder was not a man who required social performance. He seemed to operate best in silence, or in very direct conversation, which was a characteristic she found she didn't hate. Silas Vane, she said. When do I meet him? Dante set his fork down. You don't. Why? Because until I understand what his interest in you is, I don't want him to know you're here. She looked at him. He put the debt on my father. He knows who I am. He knows what family I come from. Knowing who you are and being able to get to you are different things. I thought this estate was secure. It is. He picked up his fork again. Silas doesn't have access to this building. Does he know that? Dante looked at her again. It was a sharp look, not angry, but recalibrating again, that same quality she'd noticed in the conference room. No, he said. He doesn't know I've changed the access protocols. So he thinks he can reach me here if he needs to. That's the working assumption, yes. Alara put down her own fork. And you're waiting to see what he does with that assumption. I'm gathering information. You're using me as bait. I'm using the situation. There's a difference. You keep saying that. There's a difference. As though the distinction matters when the result is the same. He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes. Not guilt. Not quite. More like the recognition of a truth he'd decided not to argue with. I told you there would be full information, he said. You did. This is full information. I don't have enough evidence to act against Silas directly. I need him to act first. And I'm the provocation. You're the unknown variable he's been maneuvering to place inside this house for months. He believes you have something he wants. Eventually, he'll move to get it. When he does, I'll have what I need. Alara picked up her fork again. She finished what was on her plate with more composure than she felt, because she had decided on the drive over from the restaurant this morning that she was not going to perform fear or distress in front of this man. She was going to be useful. She was going to understand what was happening. And she was going to protect her family, which was the original purpose of all of this. I want to know about Victor Rael's connection to Silas, she said. All of it. We don't have a confirmed connection yet, but you suspect one. I suspect Rael's Southside expansion has been too clean to be accidental. Someone inside an established organization has been feeding him information. Silas has access to enough of that information to make him a person of interest. He paused. I haven't told Silas that he's a person of interest. How long have you suspected him? 3 weeks. She counted that against the timeline. 3 weeks since Dante had started looking at Silas. 6 weeks since the surveillance photographs of her began. Silas had started the watch before Dante started looking, which meant Silas had been planning his move while appearing to be exactly what he always was. He's been preparing, she said. Yes. And whatever he's preparing for, he believes I'm the piece he needs to complete it. That's my current understanding. She sat back. The dining room was quiet around them, just the tick of the old house settling in the cold and the distant sound of a guard's radio somewhere outside. I'm going to ask you something, she said, and I need you to answer without considering what I can handle. He waited. Silas has been with you 11 years. Yes. He knows your operations, your financial structure, your people. Yes. If he's working against you, if he's actively been feeding information to Rael, what's the actual exposure? How bad is it? Dante was quiet for a long moment. Outside, a car passed on the private drive, its headlights sweeping briefly across the dining room wall. Bad, he said. How bad? If Silas has been sharing what I think he's been sharing, Rael has a blueprint for the entire Calder organization. Accounts, safe houses, personnel. He paused. The kind of information that, if activated at the right moment, could collapse everything I've built in under 72 hours. Alara absorbed that. Then why are you still waiting? Because if I move against Silas without evidence and I'm wrong, I destroy my own organization from the inside by eliminating my most trusted lieutenant on a suspicion. He held her gaze. And if I move against him with evidence but too early, before he's made his play, he'll have a contingency, something I can't see yet. He's had 11 years to build contingencies. You need him to commit. I need him to move first. Yes. She thought about that, about the specific quality of a man who was willing to let a threat grow in order to understand it fully before cutting it down. It was not patience exactly. It was something more dangerous than patience. It was the willingness to accept risk in the present in order to eliminate it completely in the future. She was not sure if she found that quality admirable or alarming. Probably both. I'm going to go through my father's things, she said. Dante looked at her. Whatever Silas thinks I have, whatever his people have been watching me for, it's connected to my father somehow. You said he once worked with your family. A beat. Yes. Before I took over the organization, he handled some logistics work for my father's operation in the early period. You didn't tell me that last night. No. Why? Because last night I was trying to get you to agree to a contract, and loading you with every piece of complicated history wasn't going to help with that. It was a completely honest answer. She gave him credit for that. My father's restaurant, she said. There's a storage room on the lower level, under the kitchen. It hasn't been properly cleaned out in years. He keeps old paperwork down there, personal records, things my mother used to organize that he stopped maintaining after she died. She paused. If there's something I have that Silas wants, and I don't know what it is, it came from somewhere. And the most likely somewhere is something my father kept. Dante looked at her for a long moment. When? He said. Tomorrow. I'll go through it at the restaurant during prep hours so it looks like routine work. I'll have 2 people nearby. Inside the restaurant? Outside. On the street. Agreed. She stood. And Dante. He looked up. Next time you withhold something relevant because you're calculating what I can handle, don't. We agreed on full information. That goes both ways or it goes neither way. He held her gaze. Understood. She went upstairs. She lay on the bed in the locked room and stared at the ceiling of the Calder estate. And she thought about her father, who had once worked for Dante's family and had never mentioned it. Not once in 28 years, not when she was a child, not when she was struggling through her business degree, not when she came home to help run his restaurant, not in any of the 10,000 quiet evenings when there had been room to say things that mattered. He had carried that for decades. The same way he'd carried the gambling, the same way he'd carried the debt, the same way he carried everything, by converting it into silence and hoping the silence would outlast the problem. It never did. She fell asleep thinking about her mother, who had been the opposite of Marcus in every way, direct, impatient with evasion, funny in the sharp, specific way of a woman who had decided early that pretending was a waste of her time. What would her mother make of this? She didn't let herself finish the thought. The storage room under Voss family kitchen smelled like the past, old cardboard and damp concrete and the particular mustiness of paper that had absorbed years of commercial kitchen steam from above. Elara went down the following morning with a flashlight and the deliberate patience of someone looking for something without knowing what it looked like. There were boxes. A lot of them. Tax records from years she barely remembered. Her mother's handwriting on the labels. Neat, precise, organized by year. Then Marcus's handwriting taking over somewhere around the time her mother got sick. Less organized, some boxes unlabeled, the system degrading under the pressure of grief and disorganization. She worked through it methodically. In the third box from the far wall, under a stack of old supplier invoices and a broken table lamp her father had clearly meant to repair for approximately 15 years, she found a different box, smaller, fireproof, the kind with a combination lock, the kind you kept important documents in. It was locked. She sat back on her heels and looked at it. She knew her father's combination habits. He used the same 4 numbers for everything. He'd told her once, grudgingly, after locking himself out of a digital safe at the restaurant. She tried it. The lock clicked open. Inside were 3 items. A folded letter with her father's name on the envelope in a handwriting she didn't recognize. A small sealed plastic bag containing a flash drive. The old kind, from at least 10 or 12 years ago, bulky and scratched. And a photograph. She picked up the photograph first. It showed 2 men, both in their 20s, standing in front of what looked like a hotel, somewhere warm. She could see palm trees at the edge of the frame. One of the men she recognized after a moment as her father, much younger, heavier, with hair he didn't have anymore. The other man she had never seen before. He was tall, sharp-featured. He had a smile that didn't reach his eyes, which were very pale, the kind of pale that read almost colorless in a photograph. He had his arm around Marcus's shoulders in the easy way of a man comfortable with his own authority. She turned the photograph over. On the back, in her father's handwriting, S+M, Havana, 2003. S. Silas. She looked at the flash drive. She looked at the letter. Her hands were very steady, which she noted with some distant, observational part of her brain as a good sign. She put everything back in the fireproof box. She locked it. She picked it up, tucked it under her arm, and walked upstairs into the kitchen where Ray, her morning line cook, was prepping stock. "Everything okay down there?" he asked. "Fine," she said. "Just pulling some old paperwork." She put the box behind the manager's desk. She texted the number Dante had given her, found something. "Can you come to the restaurant?" and waited. His response took 4 minutes. "On my way." She made coffee. She stood at the pass-through and watched the kitchen move through its morning rhythms. Stock simmering, Ray breaking down the vegetable delivery, the familiar sounds and smells of a working kitchen, and she thought about how different everything looked when you were standing inside a situation you hadn't chosen, trying to map its boundaries without being able to see the edges. Dante arrived in 20 minutes. He came through the back door, which she'd unlocked. He was alone, no visible security, dressed in dark clothes without a jacket, and he moved through the kitchen with the same unhurried quality she'd started to associate with him, that quality of a man who was always looking at more than what was directly in front of him. She showed him the box. She opened it. She put the 3 items on the prep counter between them. He picked up the photograph first. He looked at the back. He set it down. He picked up the flash drive. He stared at it for a long moment. When he looked up, his face had changed. Not dramatically. He wasn't a man who performed emotion on the outside, but something had shifted underneath the surface. Something tectonic and slow and permanent, and Alara recognized it because she'd seen the same thing in the mirror at 2 in the morning. 2 days ago, when she'd first understood the real shape of what her father had done. It was the look of a person who had just discovered that something they believed was solid had never been solid at all. "What's on the drive?" she asked. "I don't know yet," he said, "but you have an idea." He set the drive down carefully. He picked up the letter and turned it over in his hands without opening it. "Silas was with me when my brother died," he said. His voice was completely level. 15 years ago, Thomas was 24. He was killed during a confrontation with a rival organization. I spent years finding the people responsible. "You found them." "I found who I was told were responsible." He set the letter down. "If this drive contains what I think it might contain, if your father has been holding this for 15 years, then the people I found may not have been the people who were actually responsible." The kitchen hummed around them. Stock bubbled on the range. Ray moved through the walk-in with his clipboard, oblivious. "Silas," Alara said. Dante said nothing, which was its own answer. She watched him pick up the flash drive again, watched his hand close around it, careful and contained, the hand of a man holding something he could not afford to drop. "Open the letter," she said. He did. He read it once. He folded it and put it in his jacket. He looked at her. "We need to go," he said. "Now, both of us. Leave the box." "What does the letter say?" "It says your father was supposed to deliver this drive to a federal contact 11 years ago. I was supposed to testify. He agreed, and then he disappeared from the program." Alara stared at him. "He was a witness," Dante said. "Marcus was a federal informant, and he ran." Outside, somewhere at the front of the restaurant, a window broke. Not loudly. Quietly, deliberately. The specific sound of glass being cut rather than shattered. Dante had her by the arm before she'd finished processing the sound, moving toward the back door with the kind of speed that came from years of understanding what sounds meant and how much time they gave you. Ray looked up from his clipboard. "Lock the walk-in and get on the floor," Dante said. "Don't come out until I tell you." Ray dropped his clipboard. They were through the back door and into the alley before Alara heard the first sound of footsteps inside the restaurant. The alley behind Voss Family Kitchen was 40 feet long and ended in a chain-link fence with a padlocked gate, and Alara knew without having to think about it that the padlock had a key on a hook inside the kitchen door, and that key was now on the wrong side of a building that had men moving through it. Dante didn't slow down. He hit the fence at a run, got one hand on the top rail, and cleared it in a single motion that suggested he had done this before, or something close to it. He landed on the other side and turned and looked at her with his hand out. She was already climbing. She dropped down beside him. Her palm was bleeding where the chain link had caught it. A small thing, a nothing thing. And they were moving before she'd registered it, cutting through the narrow passage between 2 commercial buildings. Emerging onto a side street she recognized as running parallel to the restaurant's block. Dante had his phone out. He spoke into it briefly, 2 sentences, clipped, a street name and a number, and then he put it away and kept moving. "Where are we going?" she said. "Away from the restaurant first, then somewhere I can think." "Your car?" "It's being brought around." He didn't look at her as he walked. His eyes were moving constantly, scanning the street ahead, checking doorways, reading the parked vehicles the way someone reads a language they've known so long, it's become automatic. "Don't stop moving." "I'm not stopping." They walked 4 blocks before a dark sedan pulled to the curb, and Dante opened the rear door and they got in. The driver didn't speak. They pulled into traffic. Alara pressed the heel of her hand against her bleeding palm and looked out the window and breathed. "The flash drive," she said. Dante reached into his jacket and held it up briefly, then put it away. "My father," she said. "I know." A federal informant. He agreed to testify and then disappeared from the program. That's what the letter says. And you believe it? He looked out his own window. "I believe it's consistent with things that have never made sense to me. Your father showed up on the edge of my father's organization for about 3 years. He wasn't high up, logistics, like I said, but he was present for enough that his testimony would have mattered." He paused. "When he disappeared, I was 21. I wasn't running anything yet. I only know what the records show." "Which is?" "That a man named Marcus Voss was briefly employed and then simply stopped appearing. No confrontation, no exit. He just wasn't there anymore." He turned to look at her. "I didn't connect him to you until I started investigating the debt structure. The Voss name appeared in Silas's private ledger. That's when I pulled the old records." Alara absorbed this. She thought about her father, Marcus with his restaurant, Marcus with his gambling, Marcus with his silences and his carefully maintained smallness, the way he'd spent her entire childhood being a man who tried not to be noticed. She had always thought that was just his personality, quiet, unambitious, comfortable with obscurity. She understood now that it was something else entirely. It was the practiced invisibility of a man who had agreed to do something dangerous and then run from it, and had spent the subsequent 25 years making himself as small and forgettable as possible in the hope that whatever he'd run from would eventually forget him too. It hadn't. "He kept the drive," she said. "Yes." "Why would he keep it? If he was trying to disappear, why hold on to evidence?" Dante was quiet for a moment. "Because he didn't want to destroy it. Whatever's on it, he knew it mattered. He couldn't make himself get rid of it." He paused. "Or he thought it was the only thing keeping him alive. Evidence as insurance." "But he never used it." "No." 11 years, Dante. He sat on this for 11 years while Silas... She stopped, pressed her hand harder. "Does Silas know the drive exists?" "He must. Or he suspects. Why else run surveillance on you specifically?" He shifted toward her. "Silas has been inside my organization for 11 years. He knows every account, every property, every relationship. If there's evidence on that drive that connects him to something he can't afford to have connected, he's had 11 years to watch and wait and look for it. And my father never came forward. No. So Silas spent 11 years wondering if Marcus would eventually use it. And when the gambling debt started mounting, he saw his opening. He created the debt, Dante. Manufactured it. Made sure the terms were structured so the collateral reached beyond Marcus. To family members, Marcus would sacrifice himself to protect. He needed leverage that Marcus couldn't refuse. He looked at her. And it worked. She thought about that. About the particular architecture of it. How it had been built over years patiently, brick by brick, waiting for exactly the right moment of vulnerability. Silas had not panicked. He had planned. That was a more frightening kind of enemy than the violent kind. The car stopped in front of a building she didn't recognize. A narrow structure in a commercial zone, looked like a private office space or a storage facility from the outside. Dante got out and she followed. Inside was a single large room with bare walls, a central table, several monitors on a metal shelving unit, and two men she'd never seen before who stood when Dante entered and looked at her with the careful blankness of professionals trying to assess a variable. "This is Alara," Dante said. "She stays." The men looked at each other briefly, and then didn't look at each other again, which told her there had been some prior conversation about her that she wasn't privy to. One of them, younger, with a close-cropped beard, set up a laptop on the table and took the flash drive from Dante when it was offered. He inserted it and waited. The room was very quiet. The drive loaded. On the screen, a directory appeared. Files, dozens of them. Audio files, document scans, still images, and one video file that sat at the top of the list and was considerably larger than everything else. The young man looked at Dante. Dante looked at the screen. "The video first," he said. The footage was dated in the corner, 15 years ago, slightly degraded. The kind of quality you got from a recording device that wasn't meant to be a recording device. The location was an interior, low light, what looked like a private office. Two men at a table. One of them was Silas Vane. 15 years younger, same pale eyes, same quality of self-contained authority. The other man, older, heavy-set, with a face Alara didn't recognize, was speaking. The audio was imperfect, but the words were clear enough. The Calder kid is the problem. The older one. He's going to take over from the father within 2 years, and when he does, the current arrangements are finished. He's already talking about restructuring the financial operation. Silas. In the footage. Thomas. Yes. Thomas Calder. 24 years old and already drawing lines he's going to enforce. We need that not to happen. A pause. Silas again. I can arrange something. There's a confrontation with the rail group scheduled for next week over the territory dispute. Things go wrong in confrontations. The other man. Things go wrong. Yes. That's the language I'd use. The footage ended. Nobody spoke. Alara looked at Dante. He was standing very still with his arms at his sides and his face completely blank in the way that faces go blank when the emotion underneath them is too large to show through normal channels. She could see the tension in his jaw, in the line of his shoulders, in the specific stillness of his hands, which were not moving, which were not doing anything, which were simply hanging at his sides like they had forgotten their purpose. Dante, she said. He didn't respond. Dante, he breathed. Once. The sound of it was controlled and deliberate, the kind of breath you took when the alternative was something you couldn't afford. He killed Thomas, Dante said. His voice was completely level. That was the worst part. How level it was. He sat beside me at the funeral. He helped me find the people he'd told me were responsible. He spent 15 years inside my organization building everything I thought I was building. He stopped. And he killed my brother. The young man with the beard had gone very still at the laptop. The second man, older, gray at the temples, moved slightly toward the door, which Alara understood as an instinctive reaction. People moved away from grief like that. It had a gravitational field. The other files, Alara said, not to change the subject, because they needed to know everything that was on the drive and they needed to know it now, while they still had time to use it. The young man looked at Dante, who gave a single small nod. They went through the files. It took 40 minutes. By the end of it, the shape of what Marcus Voss had been carrying for 11 years was fully visible on the table between them. Account records showing payments from Silas to the rival organization that had supposedly attacked Thomas Calder. Communication logs. A second audio recording, shorter, more recent, in which Silas's voice and Victor Rael's voice discussed the Calder organization's financial exposures with a specificity that was only possible if Silas had been feeding Rael information from inside for years. The last document was a legal filing, a federal case number. Marcus Voss listed as a protected witness, status marked inactive. 11 years ago, Marcus had agreed to hand all of this over. He had agreed to testify. And then he had taken the drive and vanished from the program and built himself a small, silent life in a restaurant and waited for something that had never come. Your father is not a coward, Dante said. He was sitting now, elbows on the table, looking at the screen. He was afraid. That's different. He let you spend 15 years believing the wrong people killed Thomas. Yes. That's not just fear. Dante looked at her. No, it isn't. He held her gaze. But whatever he is, we can't touch him right now. Silas knows we left the restaurant in a hurry. He'll know his people didn't get the drive. He's going to move fast. She thought about what fast meant. He'll go after my father. Yes. He'll assume Marcus has it. Or that Marcus told you where it was. She pushed back from the table and stood. Marcus is at the restaurant. No, I had him picked up this morning. He's in a safe location. She stopped. You had him picked up. Before I came to the restaurant. I wasn't certain what we'd find, but I wasn't willing to leave him exposed while we looked. She stared at him. You didn't tell me. I'm telling you now. That's not the same thing. Alara. His voice was patient but direct. I'm managing multiple moving pieces simultaneously. I tell you what's relevant when it's relevant. Your father is safe. That's the relevant part. She wanted to argue. She felt the shape of the argument clearly, the specific unfairness of being told that being informed after the fact counted as being informed at all. But she also recognized that the argument was a luxury she didn't currently have, and she was becoming familiar enough with her own functioning to know when she was letting emotion lead and when she needed to step back and let logic lead instead. Right now was a logic moment. "What does Silas do next?" she asked. Dante thought about it. Visibly, which she'd noticed was unusual for him. He was a man who thought mostly behind his eyes, kept the process invisible. The fact that she could see him working through it told her something about how much the video had cost him. "He's been patient for 15 years, Dante said. "He's not going to panic, but he also knows his window is closing. I now have evidence. He'll assume that." He paused. "He'll try to control the narrative before I can use it. That means moving against me through existing channels, people inside the organization who are loyal to the structure but don't know where that structure's loyalty actually lies. He'll turn your own people against you. He'll try. He has access to the financial accounts. If he freezes assets or redirects funds, it creates chaos. Men who haven't been paid, suppliers who've been cut off, properties that suddenly can't be maintained." He stood. "He'll do it quietly at first. Make it look like an administrative problem. How long before you'd notice? 24 hours? Maybe less? Then we need to move in 24 hours. He looked at her. "We need to move in 12. The plan that came together over the next 2 hours was imperfect in the way that real plans were imperfect. Built from incomplete information and available resources and the specific time pressure of a situation that wasn't going to wait for anything better. Dante had 17 people he trusted completely, not because they were loyal to him personally, but because he could account for their whereabouts, and communication included Silas's access to them. The young man with the beard, his name was Cale, ran a parallel financial audit while they planned, looking for any unusual account movements in the last 48 hours. What Cale found at the 90-minute mark made him go quiet in a specific way that pulled everyone's attention. "2 accounts," he said. "Redirected this morning. About 4 hours ago." Dante looked at the screen. "How much?" "Combined? About 600,000. It went to a holding structure I don't recognize." "Silas," Dante said. "Not a question." "Has to be. The authorization code used was a secondary admin key. It's not one you use regularly. He would have had access to it from his system permissions, but using it leaves a trace he probably thought he'd have time to clean up." "He moved it before I even knew about the drive," Dante said. Cale nodded. "He moved the money before your visit to the restaurant. Whatever triggered him, it wasn't the drive specifically. He was already in motion." Alara looked at Dante. "What triggered him?" Dante was quiet for a moment. "Me. My investigation into the debt structure. 3 weeks ago, when I started pulling the records about Marcus." He breathed. "He knew I was looking. He just didn't know what I'd find. He started the clock when he realized you were suspicious." "Yes, which means he's been working for 3 weeks to position himself. The account movement this morning, that's not panicking. That's executing a plan he already had." He looked at Cale. "Pull everything. Every account movement, every communication log you have access to, every property authorization in the last 3 weeks. I want to see the full picture of what he's been setting up." Cale started typing. What appeared over the next 40 minutes was something Alara watched take shape the way you watched storm damage emerge after the rain stopped. Not the violence itself, but its evidence, left on everything it had touched. Silas had been methodical. He'd moved assets in small increments, distributed across enough accounts that each individual movement was below the threshold that would trigger an automatic review. He'd begun quietly redirecting the communications of 6 key figures in the Calder organization. Men whose cooperation or neutrality would be essential if Dante tried to act. He had submitted a series of low-level authorization changes to property access codes 2 weeks ago, meaning that several safe houses Dante believed were secured against outside access were, in fact, no longer secured. And in the last 48 hours, he had made contact through 3 layers of intermediary with a federal organized crime task force operating in the city. "He's going to offer them Dante," Alara said. She was reading over Cale's shoulder and had followed the communication trail to its endpoint before anyone else had said it aloud. The room was silent. "He's going to hand you to the federal authorities," she said, turning to Dante. "Before you can hand him anything. He takes you off the board, the evidence on the drive becomes his word against a federal case he built. And he walks away clean." Dante looked at the screen. His face was still doing the blank thing, still holding everything below the surface. But she could see the effort it was taking. She could see it in the tension at the corners of his eyes and in the slight forward set of his jaw. "He needs me arrested before I can present the drive," Dante said, "or before you can discredit the federal contact he's been cultivating. How long does he have on the task force timeline?" Cale pulled up the last communication. Deciphering the intermediary language took him a moment. "If this says what I think it says, he's scheduled a meeting with the task force lead for tomorrow morning." Dante was quiet. "Dante." Alara moved to where he was standing. "Look at me." He looked at her. "If Silas meets with the task force tomorrow morning before you can present the drive, I know what happens. You lose the window. Everything on that drive becomes contested evidence in a case where you're the primary defendant." "I know." "So we have tonight." He held her gaze. "One night to get ahead of him," she said. "What do you need?" He turned back to the table. The quality of his attention changed. She could see it, the way a lens sharpens when it finds focus. Whatever he'd been working through in the last hour, he was finished working through it. He was somewhere else now. "Forward." "Cale," he said, "I need the drive copied to 3 separate secure locations in the next hour. Original stays with me." "Done." "I need Marsh's case file pulled. The man Rael had killed 8 months ago. If Silas was feeding Rael the information that made that operation possible, there'll be a trace in what we just pulled." Cale started cross-referencing. Dante pulled out his phone and made 2 calls. Short, direct. She didn't hear everything, but she caught enough. Names, locations, a timeline. He was assembling something. And then his phone buzzed with an incoming message, and he looked at it, and something happened to his face that she hadn't seen before. A fracture. Small. Controlled almost immediately, but real. He held the phone out to her. The message was from a contact listed only as M. "They have the restaurant. Took 3 people from the morning shift, asking about the drive. Silas's men. I got out. Tell Dante his number 2 already flipped. Arlen is with Silas." Alara read it twice. Arlen was the name she'd heard Dante use twice in the last 2 hours. His second in command. The man he'd trusted to coordinate the 17 people he was certain of. She looked up. "Arlen's been with me 9 years, Dante said. His voice was completely flat. "Dante. 9 years. He took the phone back. He stared at it. "The 3 people Silas's men took from the restaurant. Who are they?" "The message doesn't say." He typed a response to M. They waited. 30 seconds. M came back. Ray, the morning cook. 2 waitstaff. Young woman, early 20s. Young guy, maybe 19. Alara's stomach dropped. Ray had been there when they left. She'd told him to get on the floor. He'd dropped his clipboard and she'd walked out the back door and left him there. She turned away from the table. She pressed her hand against the wall, the bare concrete wall of this anonymous room, and breathed once, twice, 3 times, very deliberately. She was not going to collapse. She was not going to let the guilt pull her under. Ray was alive. The message said they were asking questions, which meant Silas's people hadn't hurt anyone yet, which meant there was still time. She turned back around. "I want to be part of whatever you're planning," she said. Dante looked at her. "Don't make a calculation about whether I can handle it. Don't decide for me." She held his gaze. "Ray is in that restaurant because I walked out and left him there. I don't get to be managed right now." He looked at her for a long moment. She didn't look away. "The charity gala at the Calder Foundation building is tomorrow night," he said. "It's been on the calendar for 4 months. Silas knows about it. He also knows I've attended every year without exception. You're thinking about using it. I'm thinking that Silas has positioned himself to move through official channels tomorrow morning. If I don't give him a reason to move tonight instead, on my terms, in a location I control, he'll execute his plan on his own timeline. You want to draw him out. I want to give him a target he can't ignore." He paused. "The gala is a public event. 300 guests. Security infrastructure already in place. If I appear there tonight as though nothing has changed, as though I don't know what he's done, he has 2 choices. Move against me publicly, in front of witnesses, which exposes him, or do nothing and lose his window to the task force meeting." "He'll move," Alara said. "Yes. And I'm the reason he'll move instead of waiting." She understood it clearly. "I'm what he still needs. He doesn't have the drive. He doesn't know if I know what's on it. If I appear beside you tonight in public, he has to act before I can do anything with what I know." Dante looked at her. You don't have to. I'm going, she said. But you're going to get Ray and the others out of that restaurant first, before we do anything else. He held her gaze. Yes, he said. And when this is over, when Silas is finished, you tell me everything you withheld about my father. Everything. Not what you decide I need to know. He was quiet for a beat. Yes, he said again. She nodded once. Outside this anonymous room, the city was moving through its afternoon. People in traffic, people in offices, people eating lunch, and arguing on phones and carrying groceries and living their ordinary lives at a careful distance from the specific kind of weight that currently occupied this room. Alara looked at the flash drive sitting on the table. 11 years. Her father had carried this for 11 years and said nothing, while Thomas Calder stayed dead, and Silas Vane built himself deeper into the architecture of the organization that Thomas would have changed, and Dante spent 15 years grieving a brother whose murder he'd never actually understood. She thought about what kind of person Marcus Voss was. She thought about what kind of person she was. And she thought about the young woman working her Friday morning waitstaff shift at Voss Family Kitchen, who was currently sitting inside that building with Silas's men asking questions she didn't have answers to, because Alara had walked out the back door and not looked back. She picked up the flash drive from the table. She held it for a moment, feeling its scratched plastic weight in her palm. This small, ugly thing that had been sitting in a fireproof box under a broken lamp for over a decade. This small, ugly thing that had cost Thomas Calder his life and Marcus Voss his courage and Dante 15 years of misdirected grief. She put it in her jacket pocket. "Tell me the plan," she said. Ray was out by 4:30. Dante made 2 calls from the anonymous room, and within 90 minutes, 3 of his remaining loyalists had positioned themselves around Voss Family Kitchen and created enough of a distraction at the front entrance, a staged delivery dispute, loud and bureaucratic and boring, that Silas's 2 men inside moved toward the noise. Ray and the 2 waitstaff walked out the side door with a woman Alara had never met, who put them in a car and drove them to a location Dante said was clean. Alara got a text from Ray at 4:41. It said, "I'm okay. What the hell is going on?" She typed back, "I'll explain everything. Stay where you are." He sent a thumbs up. Then, "Your dad's gambling thing is way bigger than I thought, huh?" She put her phone away. The gala started at 7. That gave them 2 hours and change to get to the Calder Foundation building, establish position, and build whatever controlled environment Dante believed could contain what was coming. Alara spent 20 minutes in the back room of the anonymous space with a small bag of clothes Cale had retrieved from the estate. She hadn't asked how, and the fact that a clean dress and shoes had appeared within 40 minutes of the request told her something about the operational infrastructure Dante maintained even in a crisis. The dress was dark blue. It fit well enough. She stood in front of a cracked wall mirror and looked at herself. Still the same face, still the faint cut on her palm from the chain-link fence, still the specific exhaustion of someone who had not slept properly in 3 days. And she thought, this is what it looks like when you've made a decision you can't unmake. She looked fine. That was the strange part. She looked like someone going to a function. Dante was waiting in the main room when she came out. He'd changed too, a dark suit, white shirt, no tie. He looked at her without the usual quality of assessment and simply said, "Ready?" "No," she said. "Let's go." The Calder Foundation building was a converted industrial space on the river's edge. 6 stories of renovated brick and steel that hosted 3 or 4 high-end events per year. Alara had driven past it without knowing what it was. The foundation did legitimate work, youth programs, workforce development, a legal aid clinic on the south side. And tonight, 300 people were going to drink expensive wine inside it, while the man who funded it was using the occasion as a trap. They arrived at 6:40. Staff recognized Dante and moved aside. Security was already in place, some of it his, some of it the event's standard contracted detail, and the 2 categories were distinguishable only if you knew what to look for, which Alara was starting to. She stayed close to Dante as they moved through the building. Not performing closeness, actually close, because the building was filling up, and each new person who came through the entrance was a variable she couldn't assess, and the only fixed point in the room was the man beside her who moved through it like he was reading it in real time. "Silas will come himself," Dante said, low, near her ear, as they stopped near the main hall entrance. "He won't send people for this. He'll need to see what I know. He'll try to talk to you. Yes. And when he does, I let him. I need to hear what version of this he's decided to tell. He paused. Silas is the kind of man who believes he can always negotiate his way to the outcome he wants. He'll come in here and he'll look at both of us, and he'll have a story ready. Something that explains the account movements, something that reframes the video, something that makes himself the reasonable party in an unreasonable situation. And you'll listen long enough to understand what he knows and what he thinks we know. His eyes were moving, tracking the room. Don't let him separate us. I wasn't planning to. A hand touched her elbow from the left, and she turned fast, faster than she'd have turned a week ago, and found herself looking at a man she didn't recognize. 50s, silver hair, the comfortable posture of someone used to rooms like this. He looked past her at Dante. You came, he said. I always come, Dante said. Silas is here. Dante's attention didn't visibly change. Where? Bar, East Side. He came in 15 minutes ago with 2 people. They're not event staff. I know. The silver-haired man looked at Alara once, briefly, with the specific quality of someone updating a calculation, and then moved away into the crowd. Alara looked at Dante. Who is that? Connell. He's been with me since before I took over the organization. Silas doesn't know he reports to me independently. How many people in this room are yours? 9. Positioned across all 3 floors and both exits. He looked at her. Silas brought 2. That tells me he came to talk, not to move. Or he has more outside. Yes, which is why the exits are covered. The room filled. Music came from somewhere, live, a small ensemble in the corner doing jazz standards at a volume designed for background. Waitstaff moved through with trays. The lighting was warm and considered, the kind that made everyone look slightly better than they were, which was probably the point of lighting like that at events like this. Alara took a glass of water from a passing tray and held it and did not drink it and watched the east side of the room. She found him before Dante pointed him out. Silas Vane was 60, maybe 62, with the colorless eyes from the photograph and a physical economy of movement that reminded her uncomfortably of Dante, that quality of a person who never did anything by accident. He was in a charcoal suit, no different from anyone else in the room, talking to a woman near the bar with the relaxed attention of a man at a social function. His 2 companions stood nearby in the dispersed, casual positioning of people who were pretending to be individually present at an event. He looked up and found Dante across the room. He smiled. Not widely. Not performed. A small, private smile, the kind that passed between 2 people who understood something about each other that nobody else in the room did. He excused himself from the woman at the bar and began moving through the crowd. Alara felt her pulse in her throat. She kept her face still. She kept her body still. She thought about Ray's text, about the chain-link fence, about the flash drive in her jacket pocket. She'd kept it on her, refused to leave it in the car, and Dante hadn't argued, and she breathed. Silas reached them in under 2 minutes. Dante. He extended his hand. Dante shook it. Silas. The handshake lasted exactly as long as handshakes between people who trust each other last, which was how Alara understood that both men were performing this moment for the room. Silas turned to her. You must be Alara Voss. I am, she said. I've heard a great deal about you. His eyes were pale and very clear, and they looked at her with an attention that she felt the way you felt a draft, the presence of something cold moving through a sealed space. Your father is a remarkable man. He is, she said, in several directions. Silas looked at her for 1 beat longer than was comfortable, then looked back at Dante. I was surprised you came tonight, given everything. Everything, Dante said. The operational disruptions, the account irregularities I flagged this morning. Silas moved slightly, orienting the conversation away from the nearest cluster of guests. I've been trying to reach you all day. There are some significant problems in the financial structure that need your direct attention. Dante looked at him. Tell me about them. Not here. Silas glanced around the room, a gesture that managed to look casual while being completely calculated. I have documentation at my office. I think someone has been moving money through our clean accounts. Someone with secondary admin access who's been doing it in small increments. I flagged it this morning as soon as I noticed. He was pinning the account movements on someone else. Not Dante directly, not yet, but framing himself as the one who discovered a problem, positioning his own theft as evidence he'd found. Alara watched Dante's face. It gave nothing. "That's concerning," Dante said. "It is. I wanted to bring it to you directly rather than go through—" Silas paused, as if choosing words. "Through channels that may be compromised." "Compromised how?" Silas looked at Alara again, briefly. Dante didn't follow the look. "Silas?" "I don't know how to say this cleanly," Silas said. "There are things about your wife's family that I think you may not have the full picture on." "Tell me." "Her father had a relationship with a federal program." "I know about Marcus," Dante said. Silas stopped. A silence that lasted exactly 2 seconds, which was long enough. "You know," Silas said. "Yes." Silas looked at him. The smile was gone. Something else came into his face. Not panic, not anything so available. A kind of reorientation, the face of a chess player who has just realized the board is different from what he believed. "How long?" Silas said. "Long enough." Silas looked at Alara. Really looked at her this time, not assessing, not calculating, something more direct and more cold. "You found it." She said nothing. "The drive." "I'm not sure what you mean," she said. The corner of his mouth moved. Not a smile. Something appreciative and dangerous. "Your father should have destroyed it years ago." "Probably," she said. "He's not great at letting go of things." "No." He looked back at Dante. "How much of it have you seen?" "All of it," Dante said. The silence between them now was different from anything that had existed in the room before. It had weight. It had the specific gravity of a truth being acknowledged between two people who had both known it and had been moving toward this moment from opposite directions for an indeterminate amount of time. "Thomas," Dante said. Silas looked at him. "Tell me why." Silas was quiet for a moment. Around them, the party moved and murmured. Somebody laughed at the far end of the room. The jazz ensemble shifted into something slower. A waiter passed with a tray of champagne, and none of it touched the space between these two men. "Thomas was going to restructure the financial operations," Silas said. "He said it simply, without effect. He told me himself. He was going to bring in outside auditors. He was going to separate the clean accounts from everything else and put them under independent management." He paused. "I had arrangements that couldn't survive an audit. With Rael. With Rael's predecessor. Rael came later." He tilted his head slightly. "I built something, Dante. Over 20 years. I built something that was more than what your father had, more than what Thomas would have allowed. I wasn't going to let a 24-year-old idealist dismantle it because he'd read too many books about legitimate business." Dante looked at him. "He was my brother." "I know." "He was 24 years old." "Yes." Silas held his gaze. "And I'm sorry, for what that's worth. It was a decision made under pressure, and the pressure was real, and I have not—" He stopped. For the first time, something moved in his face that wasn't controlled. "I have not been comfortable with it." "But you did it." "Yes." "And then you sat beside me for 15 years." "Yes." Dante breathed. Once. The same controlled breath she'd seen in the anonymous room. The same specific discipline of a man whose emotion was large enough to require active management. Alara was watching Silas's companions. They had moved, slightly. Repositioned. She could see it in her peripheral vision. Both of them had drifted 2 or 3 steps closer to the main hall entrance in the last 30 seconds. She didn't turn her head. She kept her gaze on Silas and moved her hand to Dante's arm, 2 light fingers against his sleeve. He felt it. His gaze didn't move from Silas, but she felt the small shift in his posture that told her he'd registered it. "What are you going to do?" Silas asked. "What do you think I should do?" Silas looked at him evenly. "I think you're going to try to use the drive. Present it to someone you believe you can trust. A federal contact, perhaps." He paused. "I think you'll discover that the federal task force operating in this city has already been briefed, by me, this morning." Another pause. "I think you'll discover that the briefing positions you as the primary subject of their investigation and that your sudden possession of a decades-old flash drive will look, to them, like manufactured evidence presented by a man trying to avoid prosecution." Dante said nothing. You don't have a move, Silas said. I'm sorry. I took it from you 3 weeks ago when I realized you'd started looking. He straightened his jacket. The reasonable outcome here is that you step back from the organization, quietly. The accounts that were moved this morning, they go toward a transition structure. The Calder operation continues under restructured management. You walk away with enough to live on, and this conversation never happened. And Alara. Silas looked at her. She goes home. The marriage arrangement is dissolved. She had nothing to do with any of this. Her father made choices she wasn't responsible for. He paused. I have no interest in her, provided the drive is returned. Alara heard what he didn't say. Provided you don't have a copy. You made a mistake, she said. Silas looked at her. You moved the money this morning, before we found the drive, before you knew whether we had it or not. She held his gaze. If you were as careful as you think you are, you would have waited. But you didn't wait. You moved the money because you were scared, and because you were scared you moved too early, and because you moved too early, she stopped. You left a trace. Something flickered in his pale eyes. Cale found it, she said. 2 accounts, secondary admin key, 4 hours ago. Time-stamped before our visit to the restaurant, before you could have known what we found. She kept her voice level. You told Dante just now that you flagged the account movements this morning as a problem you discovered. But the timestamp puts you as the originating authorization, not a discovery, an action. Silas looked at her with that cold, direct attention. You're smarter than your father, he said. Most people are. His hand moved, not toward her, toward his jacket, a small gesture, and the 2 men at the entrance were already moving, crossing the room in the specific way that people cross rooms when the conversation has ended and the next part has started. Everything happened very fast. Dante moved left, putting himself between Alara and the nearest of Silas's men. He said something short and sharp, and 4 of the 9 people he had positioned in the room peeled away from their cover positions simultaneously, converging from different angles. Silas's man reached Dante first, close, grabbing for his jacket, trying to control rather than strike. And Dante caught his wrist and redirected the force of the grab in a single motion that sent the man sideways into a catering table, glasses going down in a cascade of noise and ice. The room erupted. Not violence, people moving, pressing back, voices rising, the specific chaos of 300 people understanding simultaneously that something had gone badly wrong at an event they'd dressed up for. Alara moved, not toward the exit, toward the control room. She'd asked Dante about the building's internal broadcast system on the drive over. He'd told her, 3rd floor, the room behind the lighting booth. The system ran to speakers throughout the building and had been used in prior events for presentations. She didn't know if what she was about to do would work. She didn't know if Dante had prepared what she'd asked him to prepare. She ran on the assumption that he had, because she had nothing else to run on. She took the stairs. Behind her, below her, she could hear the sounds of the main hall fragmenting, raised voices, something heavy falling, the particular sharp sound of a radio being keyed. She didn't look back. 2nd floor landing, 3rd floor. The door to the production level was unlocked. Dante's people, she didn't stop to think about it. And she went through it and down a short corridor and found the door marked AV Production and pushed it open. A young woman in a headset was already moving toward the door in alarm. Alara held up her hand. Alara Voss, she said. Dante Calder sent me. There's a USB drive coming. I need the main system. The woman stared. Now, Alara said. The woman stepped aside. Below the main hall feed on the monitor showed a fragmenting crowd, security personnel moving through it. 2 figures she identified as Dante's men, escorting one of Silas's companions toward a side exit. The main hall cameras showed Silas standing in the center of the room, very still, watching what was happening around him with the expression of a man calculating which direction his exit was. He hadn't moved yet. He was still calculating. Alara plugged the drive into the production board. She had 40 seconds of audio on it. Dante had pulled it himself from the original footage. 40 seconds of Silas Vane's voice, clear and unambiguous, discussing Thomas Calder's death in the specific language of a man who had ordered it. They'd isolated it, cleaned it, time-stamped it with the original file metadata, and copied it to a separate drive she'd carried in her jacket all evening alongside the original. She found the broadcast function. She opened the file. She looked at the monitor, where Silas was still standing in the center of the room, and she pressed play. His voice came out of every speaker in the building. The Calder kid is the problem. The older one. People in the main hall went still. Thomas Calder, 24 years old and already drawing lines. Silas looked up. Not at the speakers, up toward where the production room was, as though he could see through the floor. I can arrange something. Things go wrong in confrontations. The room was completely silent now. Silas's face changed. Not dramatically, but it changed. Something in it that had been held in place for 15 years, held in place through funerals and conversations and years of proximity to the grief he had created, finally and visibly gave way. He turned toward the exit. Dante was standing in front of it. He'd come up through the side stairs, she realized. He'd anticipated the move, had positioned himself at the exit before Silas made for it, because Dante Calder had been thinking 4 moves ahead of everyone in this room since the moment they walked in. The two men looked at each other across the cleared space of the main hall. Silas stopped. "Dante," he said. His voice was still steady, still that same quality of a man who believed he could negotiate his way to any outcome. "Whatever you're planning, this isn't the way to end it. A recording in a room full of civilians." 40 seconds, Dante said. He was breathing hard. She could see it from the monitor, the slight rise and fall of his chest, the controlled effort of a man who had been in a physical altercation 60 seconds ago and was now standing perfectly still. 40 seconds of audio recorded 15 years ago. I've been playing out what you did to my brother for 15 years, and it fits in 40 seconds. Silas said nothing. "The federal task force you briefed this morning," Dante said. "They're currently receiving the complete drive contents from a secure transmission Cale sent 14 minutes ago, including the timestamp on the account movements, including the communication log showing your contact with Rael." He paused. "I'm not going to hand you to them. I'm going to stand here while they come through that door." Silas stared at him. "It's over," Dante said, simply. Not with anger. He'd moved past the kind of anger that needed to be announced. "It's over, and you did it yourself when you moved the money 3 weeks early because you panicked." The doors at the far end of the hall opened. 4 people came through them. Not in uniform, plain clothes, but the specific posture and formation of people who had done this before. One of them held up a badge. Silas didn't run. She'd expected him to run, and she understood in that moment something about the kind of man he was. He had never built a plan that included running, had never considered himself someone for whom running would be necessary, and so when it came to it, his body simply didn't have the instruction. He stood in the center of the cleared room while the crowd pressed back and Dante stood at the exit, and the plainclothes officers moved through the space toward him. He looked up one last time at the ceiling, at the speakers, at the production room he couldn't see. He didn't say anything. They put the cuffs on him with the quiet efficiency of people who had prepared for this, and they walked him toward the doors he'd come in through, and the room stood very still and watched him go. Ilara leaned against the production board and pressed her hand, the one that had been bleeding since the chain-link fence, which had reopened at some point in the last 20 minutes, against her jacket, and breathed. On the monitor, she could see Dante. He was standing where he'd been standing when they took Silas out. He hadn't moved. He was looking at the door. His hands were at his sides, open, still. She watched him stand there in the cleared space of the hall his family had built, in the building funded by an organization that had been rotting from the inside for 15 years, and she thought about what it cost to stand in a place like that and not move. She turned off the broadcast system. She went back down the stairs. When she came back into the main hall, the crowd was beginning to fragment, people finding their coats, speaking to each other in low, urgent voices. The event dissolving around the edges the way events did when the reason for being there had abruptly ceased to be social. Security was managing the exits. Dante's 9 people were visible now in the way they hadn't been before, no longer pretending. She crossed the room to where Dante was standing. He heard her coming. He turned. She looked at him. He looked at her. His face was open in a way she hadn't seen before. Not vulnerable, not broken, but open. Like something that had been locked for a very long time had simply been unlocked. And the door hadn't swung wide yet, but the mechanism had moved. "The task force," she said. "They actually came. I made a different contact than Silas knew about." He paused. "There's a federal prosecutor who's been building a case on Rael's organization for 8 months. She was very interested in the drive. You had this prepared. Parts of it. You improvised the broadcast. Did it help? It created 40 witnesses who heard his voice admit to ordering my brother's death. He looked at her. Yes, it helped. She nodded. Her hand was bleeding through her jacket sleeve now. She could feel it, a slow, insistent warmth that needed attention. We need to go, Dante said. He'd noticed. His eyes had gone to her arm. You need that looked at. I need about 14 other things looked at first. In what order? She looked at the room around them. The abandoned glasses, the overturned catering table, the echo of 300 people's shock still hanging in the air, and she thought about everything that had accumulated in the last 72 hours, everything that was waiting outside this building, everything that was not finished and would not be finished tonight. My father, she said. Dante nodded. He needs to understand what just happened, not from a third party, not from a news report. She held his gaze. He needs to hear it from me, and then he needs to decide what he's going to do about it. We can go to him tonight. Yes, she breathed. And then I need you to tell me what this means for the organization, for everything you built. If the drive goes to the federal prosecutor, it means everything gets looked at, Dante said. Every account, every operation, every arrangement my father made and I inherited and didn't ask enough questions about. He paused. I've known for 3 weeks that this was where it was going. I've had some time to decide how I feel about it. And how do you feel about it? He looked at her for a long moment. Like something that should have been taken apart a long time ago is finally going to be taken apart, he said. Outside, somewhere in the city, sirens moved through the night in their ordinary way, going toward ordinary emergencies. The sound of a city that kept happening regardless of what any particular room inside it had just decided. Elara looked at the exit. She looked at Dante. Let's go, she said. They drove to Marcus in silence. Not the silence of two people who had nothing to say, but the silence of two people who had said enough for one night and were carrying the rest of it internally, separately, the way you carry things when you're still too close to them to share the weight without dropping it. Elara kept her hand pressed against her jacket sleeve. The bleeding had slowed. Outside, the city moved past the car windows in its nighttime version, storefronts dark, streetlights orange and steady, the occasional figure on a sidewalk going somewhere with purpose or going nowhere at all. Dante had told the driver the address and then sat back and looked at his hands in his lap. She watched him do it without appearing to watch. He turned his hands over once, palms up, then down, and then he stopped and looked out his window, and that was all. But she had seen it. The specific inventory a person took of themselves after something was finished, making sure they were still there, making sure the version of themselves that had walked into the Calder Foundation building was still more or less the version sitting in this car. She understood the impulse. The safe house was a 2-story residential property in a quiet block on the northwest side, the kind of house that had been a family home once, and now existed in the careful anonymity of a property maintained without being lived in. There was a light on in the front room. One of Dante's people opened the door before they reached it. Marcus was in the kitchen. He was sitting at the table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold in front of him, still in the clothes he'd been wearing when they'd picked him up that morning, looking like a man who had been sitting with his own thoughts for hours and had not found the experience pleasant. When Elara came through the door, he looked up and something in his face moved in several directions at once, relief and guilt, and the specific shame of a person who understands that someone they love has been cleaning up their mess again. She sat down across from him. Dante stayed in the doorway. He didn't come in. He understood, she thought, that this was not his room. Silas is in federal custody, she said. Marcus put both hands around his cold coffee cup. The drive, she said. I found it in the fireproof box under the kitchen. The photograph. The letter. She watched his face. Everything. He closed his eyes. You were a federal witness, she said. He opened his eyes. Yes. You agreed to testify. You had the drive. And then you ran. Yes. Why? It wasn't quite a question. It was the kind of statement that left room for an answer without demanding one in a particular shape. Marcus looked at the table. He turned the coffee cup in his hands, a slow rotation, something to do with his fingers while he found the words. I had you, he said. You were 4 years old. Your mother was pregnant with your brother. He didn't make it. You were too young to remember. She was sick already, starting to be sick. We didn't know how bad yet." He paused. The federal program was real. The handler was real. The case was real. But the protection they were offering, it was witness relocation. New names. New city. Everything gone. He looked up at her. "Your mother refused." Alara went very still. "She said she wasn't going to disappear. She had family. She had a life. She said if I'd gotten myself into something dangerous, I needed to get myself out of it without destroying everything else." He exhaled slowly. She was right. She was usually right. "So you ran from the program." "I took the drive because I thought, I don't know what I thought, insurance, something to hold on to in case they came for us anyway." He shook his head. "I should have destroyed it. I knew I should have destroyed it, but I kept thinking, if something happened, if Silas ever came for me, at least I had something." And Silas never came. Not directly. Not for years. And then the gambling got bad and I needed money, and Silas's man appeared with a loan that seemed clean, and I told myself it was coincidence. His voice flattened. "I knew it wasn't coincidence. I borrowed from him anyway." Alara sat with that for a moment. The specific quality of self-deception required to borrow money from the man you'd been hiding from for a decade. To look directly at the danger and choose it anyway, because the alternative was admitting how badly you'd already failed. "You put Bren and Joel's names on the document," she said. "I know. You knew what you were doing. I thought if the debt was distributed, it would be harder to use as a single pressure point. I thought it would protect you." He stopped. "I know how that sounds. It sounds like something someone tells themselves when they've already made the decision and they need a reason that isn't the truth." He didn't answer. "The truth is you were scared," she said. "And you made a series of decisions to avoid dealing with the thing you were scared of, and eventually you ran out of room to keep avoiding it. And it became my problem, and Bren's problem, and Joel's problem." She held his gaze. "I'm not saying this to punish you. I'm saying it because I need you to hear it clearly before we talk about what comes next." Marcus looked at her. "What comes next," she said, "is that the federal prosecutor who took Silas into custody tonight is going to want to talk to you. The original witness agreement, I don't know if it's still valid after 11 years of non-compliance. I don't know what exposure you have." She paused. "But you're going to talk to them. You're going to be honest. You're going to tell them everything you know, and you're going to stop making calculations about what you can manage and what you can hide." Alara, Dad. Her voice was not soft and it was not hard. It was the voice of someone who had made a decision. "You don't get to manage this anymore. You've been managing it for 25 years and look where we are." He looked at her for a long moment. His eyes were wet. She noticed it and did not look away from it and did not offer him anything about it, because she was tired of absorbing things for this man, even the things that were real. "Okay," he said. "Okay meaning you'll talk to them." "Yes." "Okay meaning no more private calculations." "Yes." He pressed his hands flat on the table. "Yes." She nodded. She stood. She started to move toward the door, and then she stopped and turned back and looked at him. At Marcus Voss, 61 years old, in a borrowed house, with a cold cup of coffee. And she thought about her mother, who had been right and had died anyway. She thought about the restaurant, which smelled like 20 years of food and effort. She thought about the 4-year-old she'd been when her father had made the choice that had shaped the next 24 years of their lives without her knowledge or consent. She couldn't fix any of that. It was not fixable. It was only livable, and only barely, and only if he stopped pretending. "I love you," she said. "That's not the same thing as forgiveness, and it's not the same thing as trust. We'll figure out the rest later." Marcus put his face in his hands. She went back through the door. Dante was in the hallway, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, not looking at her, giving her the exit from that room without making it a moment. She appreciated it more than she could have explained. "The prosecutor," she said, low. "Can you facilitate a meeting? Tomorrow or the day after? Voluntary." Marcus comes in with a lawyer. "I know someone," Dante said. "I'll make a call tonight." "Thank you." They stood in the hallway of the quiet house for a moment. "Your hand," he said. "It needs cleaning. It's fine. There's a first aid kit in the kitchen." "I'm aware. I'll handle it." He looked at her. "Elara." "I'm fine," she said. And then, because she was tired enough to be honest, I will be. He nodded. They drove back to the estate separately from the timeline. Dante had calls to make, people to reach. The beginning of what she understood was going to be a lengthy and complicated process of cooperation with federal authorities and the systematic accounting of everything the Calder organization had been and done. He made those calls in the car. She listened to half of one conversation and then looked out the window and let the words become background. The estate was quiet when they arrived. The usual exterior rotation of guards was reduced. She noticed that, filed it away. The household staff had gone for the night. The old house settled around them as they came in, its particular vocabulary of creaks and clicks, the sound of a structure that had been standing for a century and intended to stand for another one. She went upstairs. She cleaned her hand at the bathroom sink, which had opened up enough to require 3 butterfly strips from the kit under the cabinet. She did it slowly, without rushing, with the methodical attention she gave to tasks that needed doing correctly when she was too tired to do them quickly. The cut was clean. It would heal without much trouble. She sat on the edge of her bed. She looked at the room, the lamp, the window, the bare garden in the early morning dark outside. And she thought about the fact that she had been in this room for less than a week, and it already had a quality of familiarity that she associated with having survived something inside it. She thought about Silas Vane, sitting somewhere in a federal facility with his pale eyes and his 60 years of careful construction unraveling around him. She tried to feel something about it and found that what she felt was mostly exhaustion, which was perhaps the most honest response. She thought about Thomas Calder, who had been 24 years old and had wanted to change the shape of something and had not been allowed to. She thought about Dante in some other part of this house, on calls she couldn't hear, beginning the long, specific work of accounting for a life he'd built on a foundation that had been rotten from one end without his knowledge. She lay back on the bed without changing clothes. She slept. 3 weeks passed. They were not simple weeks. They were weeks of federal meetings and legal consultations and the specific bureaucratic grind of a large-scale investigation that did not care about anyone's timeline or emotional state. Dante cooperated fully. She knew this from what he told her and from what she read in the careful, restrained press coverage that began appearing in the second week. The Calder organization's financial operations were placed under independent oversight. Several individuals were charged. 2 properties were seized. The legitimate businesses, a real estate management company, a logistics firm, a small chain of commercial laundromats, were separated from the rest and placed under independent management pending review. Victor Rael was arrested on a Tuesday morning. She read about it on her phone in the restaurant kitchen while Ray prepped the lunch service beside her, pretending not to watch her face. "You okay?" he said finally. "Yes." "You want to tell me what's actually been going on? Because my cousin saw something on the news about—" "Later," she said. "I'll tell you everything. Not now." He went back to his prep. She put her phone away. Marcus met with the federal prosecutor twice. The original witness agreement had expired and could not be reinstated, but his voluntary cooperation and the completeness of the drive's contents gave him a negotiating position that the prosecutor found useful. He would not face charges. He would provide a full deposition. He would attend any proceedings where his testimony was material. He came to the restaurant the day after his second meeting and sat at the counter while Alara restocked the reach-in cooler and told her all of it, every detail. He spoke slowly and without qualification for the first time she could remember, and she listened without interrupting, and when he was finished, she closed the cooler and said, "Good." He looked at her. "That's all?" he said. "For today," she said. "Come back Sunday. I'll make you lunch." He came back Sunday. She made him lunch. It was not comfortable and it was not resolved, but it was real, and real was what they had to work with. Alara's Uncle Bren called her in the second week. He was angry, specifically, quietly, durably angry, the kind that came from a man who had trusted his brother and had been used as an instrument without his knowledge. She let him be angry. She did not make excuses for Marcus. She said, "I know, you're right. He knows you're right." Bren was quiet for a moment and then said, "Is the restaurant going to make it?" And she said she thought so, and he said he'd put in for a shift if she needed a hand on weekends, because he used to cook, and he'd been thinking about getting back to it. She said she'd think about it. She did, and she called him back the next day and said yes. The marriage dissolution paperwork was filed in the 4th week. It was quiet and administrative and came with no ceremony, which was appropriate given that the marriage itself had had none. Dante's lawyer and her lawyer, she had a lawyer now which still felt slightly surreal, handled the details. It took about 40 minutes total, spread across 2 meetings she didn't attend in person. What she did attend, in the 4th week, was a conversation with Dante in the estate's kitchen at 7 in the morning, because she'd come down early to make coffee and found him already there, standing at the window with a cup, looking out at the garden in which things were beginning, very tentatively, to bud. "The estate goes on the market next month," he said without turning. He'd heard her come in. "I know, Cale told me." "You've been talking to Cale." "He's easy to talk to. Where are you going?" He turned from the window. He looked tired in the specific way he'd looked tired since the night of the gala. Not acutely exhausted, but carrying something. The low, continuous weight of a man who was doing a difficult thing correctly and was not going to pretend it wasn't difficult. "I don't know yet," he said. "Somewhere smaller." "That's not very specific." "No." He looked at his coffee. "The security firm. I've been thinking about it seriously. Legitimate personal security consulting. There's a market, and I have skills that translate." He paused. "It would take a year to build properly. Maybe more." "You'd be good at it." He looked at her. "You think so?" "I think you're very good at reading spaces and people and threats. And I think you're honest, which is rarer in that industry than it should be." She poured her coffee. "I think you'd be good at it." He was quiet for a moment. "The prosecutor's office asked about you." She looked at him. "What do you mean?" "Whether you were a voluntary participant in the arrangements. Whether you had independent counsel at the time of the agreement." He held her gaze. "I told them the full truth, including that I showed you the surveillance photographs to establish the threat before offering the contract. That could have made things complicated for you." "It could have." "It didn't." He set his cup down. "They're satisfied you were not a willing participant in any criminal enterprise. Your name is clear." She hadn't known. She'd been waiting for that confirmation until she heard it and felt something in her chest release. "Thank you," she said. "I told the truth." "That's not something you thank me for." "I'm thanking you anyway." He looked at her for a moment. "Alara." She waited. "I want to be direct about something." "You usually are." "The arrangement is dissolved. You have no obligation to anything, to this house, to the situation, to me." He said it carefully, like a man who had rehearsed the fairness of the words and was determined to deliver them without changing them. "You should know that I'm aware of that, and I don't want you to feel—" "Dante." He stopped. "I know," she said. "I know I'm not obligated. I've known that since the night I called your number and said I had conditions." "Yes." "I'm still here." He looked at her. "I'm not here because of the contract," she said. "The contract is dissolved. I'm here because I made coffee and you were already in the kitchen and I didn't think of anywhere else I particularly wanted to be this morning." She held his gaze. "That's a different thing." He was quiet for a long moment. She could see him doing that internal recalibration again, the small, careful process of a man who had spent a very long time in a world where nothing was quite what it appeared to be, learning to trust what appeared to be simple. "It is a different thing," he said. "Yes." They drank their coffee in the kitchen of the house that was going on the market next month, in the early light of a morning that had nothing particular required of it, and the garden outside the window continued to do what gardens did in spring, quietly, without announcement, turning toward the available light. The restaurant renovation took 6 weeks. Alara had been thinking about it since before everything, since the year before, honestly, when she'd stood in the dining room after closing and looked at the tired walls and the dated furniture and thought, this place could be something different. She hadn't done anything about it then because the restaurant was her father's, and she'd been managing it like a caretaker rather than an owner, keeping it alive rather than making it grow. That changed. Marcus signed over the lease and the operating license voluntarily in the 6th week, in a conversation that was harder than the ones that had preceded it because it required him to name clearly what he was giving up and why. He was not graceful about it. He made 2 arguments that didn't hold and one that almost did, and Alara listened to all of them and then said, do you want this place to survive or do you want to be in charge of it? Because I can deliver one of those. He was quiet for a moment. Can I still cook? He said. On Sundays, she said. When Bren is there. He signed. She took the cash reserve that had been replenished by the organizational transition, money that had come to her as part of the formal unwinding of the contract arrangement, a sum she hadn't asked for and had been surprised by and had decided after several days of consideration to use rather than refuse, and she put it into the renovation. New tables, the walls redone, the kitchen equipment upgraded, finally, properly upgraded, the walk-in replaced, and the range replaced, and the reach-in that had needed a new dial for 3 years given an entire new unit. She kept the name. She kept the floor plan. She kept the old photograph of the original Voss family kitchen from 1987, her grandparents standing in front of it squinting into the sun, and she had it reframed and hung near the entrance where people could see it when they came in. Ray stayed. He got a raise and a title, headline cook, which was what he'd been doing for 2 years without the designation, and he accepted both with the specific embarrassed dignity of a person who had been waiting to be acknowledged without wanting to have to ask. The reopening was on a Saturday. It was full from 11 in the morning. Bren worked the line with Ray and did not get in the way, which Alara had told him was the primary requirement. Marcus sat at the counter for most of the afternoon and talked to regular customers who'd been coming in for years and seemed to feel the particular satisfaction of a man watching something he'd built outlast his ability to manage it. Joelle came in with her kids at 2 o'clock and sat in the corner booth and ordered the soup and the sandwich and left a note on the table that said, "It looks good. You did good." No signature. Alara kept the note. Dante came at 4:30. She'd known he might come. She'd told him the date, mentioned it once without pressing it, and she'd told herself it didn't matter either way, which was partially true. It mattered somewhat. She was honest enough with herself to know it mattered somewhat. He came through the front door. No car outside that she could see. No driver. It was in a dark jacket over a gray shirt, no tie, the particular version of casual that looked like something he was still learning how to wear. He looked around the restaurant. She came out from behind the counter when she saw him. They stood in the entrance for a moment, near the reframed photograph of her grandparents. "It looks different," he said. "It is different." He looked around again, taking it in the way he took things in, that complete quality of attention that had unsettled her the first time she'd seen it, and that she understood now was simply how he was. He saw everything. He cataloged it. He didn't do it to be useful. He did it because it was the way his mind worked. "It's good," he said. "It looks like it knows what it is." She thought that was probably the most accurate description she'd heard. "Sit down," she said. "I'll get you something." "You don't have to—" "Sit down, Dante." He sat. She brought him coffee and the soup and the bread that had been coming out of the new oven all afternoon, and she sat across from him in the window booth and watched him eat with the kind of simple, unperformed hunger of someone who hadn't stopped moving long enough to eat properly. And she thought, this is what it looks like on the other side of something. Not clean, not resolved in the way that stories resolved, with explanations that answered every question and emotions that had found their correct containers. but present. Both of them present in this restaurant on this Saturday afternoon, with the sounds of the kitchen behind her and the street outside the window and coffee that was genuinely good because she'd finally bought a machine that worked. "The firm," she said. "How's it going?" "Slowly. I have two clients, a small commercial property management company that needs security assessments and a family that wants personal security consulting for a European trip." He paused. "It's modest. Modest is fine. It's very different from what I'm used to." "Is that bad?" He considered it. She watched him consider it, actually consider it, turning it over the way you turned over something that might be one thing or another and you hadn't decided yet. "No," he said. "It's not bad." He looked at her. "It's the first thing I've built that I know the bottom of." She understood what he meant. The foundation, being able to see it, being able to trust it, because you'd laid it yourself from the first stone. She picked up her coffee. "I've been thinking about something," she said. "Tell me." "The restaurant is going to need a security assessment. Basic stuff. The alarm system is 10 years old. The camera coverage has gaps. The cash handling procedure is whatever my father decided it was in 2015. She looked at him across the table. "I'd want someone who's honest, someone who doesn't oversell, someone who actually looks at what's there instead of what they'd like to charge for." He looked at her. "Are you offering me a client?" he said. "I'm telling you there's work here if you want it." He was quiet for a moment. Something in his face moved, not the small controlled flicker she'd learned to read as emotion kept in check, but something fuller, something that was finished keeping itself in check. Not dramatic. He wasn't a dramatic man and she didn't think he ever would be, but real. "I want it," he said. "Good." She stood. "Come back Tuesday. I'll show you the camera system." He looked up at her. She looked back. They had met in a restaurant at 2 in the morning over an envelope and a threat. She had refused him, and then agreed, and then refused again, and then agreed again, and she had climbed a chain-link fence and spent a week in his house and broadcast a dead man's voice through a speaker system in front of 300 people, and she had sat across from her father and told him the truth, and she had taken the deed to this building and made it into something that could survive. He had lost his brother 24 years too late to grieve correctly. He had built an empire on a compromised foundation and then chosen to dismantle it rather than protect it at the cost of himself. He had stood at a door instead of running through it. None of that was simple. None of it had clean edges. That was fine. Clean edges were for people who hadn't been anywhere. "Tuesday," he said. "Tuesday," she said. She went back to the kitchen. Through the pass-through, she could hear the sounds of the afternoon service, Ray calling a ticket, the particular rhythm of a kitchen that had found its stride, the low background sound of the dining room doing what dining rooms did when they were full of people who were somewhere they wanted to be. She picked up a ticket. She started to work. Outside the window of Voss family kitchen, the late afternoon light came down on the street the way it did in early spring, low and specific and gold at the edges, the kind of light that made ordinary things look as though they were worth looking at. A bus went past. A woman walked a dog. Two kids on the sidewalk were arguing about something that didn't matter and probably wouldn't matter by the time they reached the corner. The city moved. In the window booth, Dante Calder drank his coffee and watched the street with the same attention he gave to everything, which was the full amount, all of it, held lightly enough that it didn't become possession. After a while, he stopped watching the street and looked at the kitchen instead. The last light came through the front windows and lay across the floor in long, warm strips, and the kitchen was loud with work, and the woman moving through it was not looking at him. She was reading a ticket and calling something to Ray and pulling a towel from her apron with the practiced motion of someone who had done this 10,000 times and would do it 10,000 more. He watched her for a moment. Then he looked back out the window. He picked up his coffee. He stayed. This is a work of fiction created entirely for entertainment purposes. All characters, organizations, events, and locations are imaginary and bear no relation to real persons or actual events.